Hello, my name is John, and I'm your one-stop shop for action movies, comic book movies, and the occasional horror movie reviews and rankings, and pretty much anything else I decide to talk about. And today, we're talking about the Fast and Furious franchise, a franchise that is very near and dear to my heart. I was born in the late 90s, and while most people my age probably grew up watching Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, even Pirates of the Caribbean, I was never big into the whole fantasy thing. I've gotten more into it in recent years, but growing up, I was never really into fantasy all that much. But my dad did take me to a lot of car shows, and there's just something very appealing to the Fast and Furious movies. And so, those first three movies, for as long as I can remember, I was watching them on cable, DVRing them on cable and everything. I've seen 4 and up in theaters, 5 and up opening weekend. I don't think any of these movies are necessarily the same quality as like Return of the King. There's a reason that one like swept the Oscars that year, but this franchise just means a whole lot more to me than those movies, those other franchises, than those other franchises that I mentioned. And I pretty much enjoy most of these movies, and I think I've just wasted enough of your time already. So let's get started. So coming in last place at number 9 is The Fate of the Furious. Now, this is a movie, I don't know if I'd necessarily say it's the worst quality or worst made movie in the franchise, but it does a couple of things that really frustrate me. And the first thing that it does is it has Charlize Theron as the villain, Cypher. And I love Charlize Theron. She does a great job in the role. I just don't like the way she's utilized in the movie. Because this movie, The Fate of the Furious, came out in 2017, the same year as Atomic Blonde. And so it's not like 2 years later she learned how to fight and became an action star. So when she's in this movie, you have Charlize Theron, maybe arguably the best or one of the best female action stars of today. And she just feels like she's stuck behind a computer and standing and giving orders the entire movie rather than actually getting involved in the action. And that just really frustrates me. Like in the end of the final scene, in the final battle, if you will, she's like standing in a command room giving orders and like typing on computers and stuff. And even when Jason Statham gets on the plane and into that control room, you think maybe there'll be this badass fight between Jason Statham and Charlize Theron, but instead she just opens the hatch and parachutes out. And you just kind of get stuff like that through most of this movie with her character, and that just really frustrates me as both a Fast and Furious fan as well as a Charlize Theron fan. And then the second thing that frustrates me with this movie revolves around the baby. It's not necessarily the existence of the child that bugs me. It's the age of the child that bugs me. For the child, if it was a 4 or 5-year-old toddler, I'd be perfectly fine with this storyline. But it's because it's an actual like baby. And given the timeline of everything, that means for it to be Dom's, he would have had to have cheated on Letty. And that's just not something Dom would do. Roman Pierce, I could believe that, but like Dom, no, that's not something he would do. And I know it's not something that's necessarily in the specific movie, but it's something the movie suggests that just frustrates me as a big Fast and Furious fan. Pussy. And now coming in 8th place is Fast and Furious, the 4th movie. Now this one is the one I personally do feel like might be the worst made in terms of the quality because most of my issues with this movie revolve around things like cinematography and lighting and just the visual look and aesthetic of the movie. It just feels very, very dark and shadowy for, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me or look right. And then the cave sequences, I don't think are executed very well at all. That being said, I do think the opening scene is probably the best in the franchise. I love the opening to this movie. But even something with this movie that frustrates me a little is the dialogue, and particularly Brian O'Connor's dialogue. I find him very whiny in this movie for some reason, and I don't. He's my favorite character in this franchise. Arguably, maybe my favorite movie character of any movie. But I just don't like the way he's written. Paul Walker does a great job with the performance. He always does, but I don't like the dialogue he's given. I don't like the way he's written in this fourth movie. It also doesn't, the storyline, the main plot of this movie ages terribly because of the direction of the later sequels. The whole plot line around Letty dying. It just doesn't age very well, knowing that she didn't die and that Brian didn't make sure she was dead and that whole type of thing. You could probably blame 6 a little bit for that as well. And now I'd just like to say the rest of these movies are all movies that I pretty much love, to various extents obviously, but I love all of the next movies on this list. And so coming in at number 7 is The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. Now this is a movie I have a ton of nostalgia for, but as time goes on, I don't think it ages entirely well, especially with the exclusion of most of these characters from the franchise in the later sequels. And it has one of the worst examples of hiring a middle-aged man almost to play a high schooler. And so that doesn't help at all. And plus, this is the only one where the actual final action scene is a race. And I don't think that hurts the movie at all, but it does make it less impactful in terms of when all the other movies have big, like, actual action set pieces and stuff. This one just kind of has a drift race down a mountain. But I still love this movie. And the soundtrack is one of the greatest movie soundtracks of all time, in my opinion. I love the soundtrack to this movie. And so coming in at number 6 is the most recent film, Hobbs Shaw. Now, if I was doing a Dwayne Johnson ranking or a Jason Statham ranking, this would probably be higher than some of the movies on this list if they were, in terms of the ones they were in. Because I think this is a great Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham movie, an action movie. But I don't necessarily think it's a great Fast and Furious movie, simply because even though the plot line revolves around family with Jason Statham, with Deckard Shaw and Hattie Shaw being brother and sister, it doesn't feel like a Fast and Furious movie until you get into that third act on the island of Samoa, and you get into Dwayne Johnson, Luke Hobbs' family. But I do love this movie. I do think Brixton is a great villain with a great performance by Idris Elba, and he's probably the best villain outside of Deckard Shaw in the movie that he was a villain in, Furious 7. And I love Vanessa Kirby does a great job in this movie as well.
Alien is Fidel. ¿Qué pasa, Jota?
I'm too fast, too furious. I'm too fast for y'all, man.
And coming in at number 5, we have Too Fast, Too Furious. This is a movie that I absolutely love for extremely nostalgic reasons. You know, I do go back and forth between this and Hobbs and Shaw, but nostalgia wins the day for me when I did this ranking. This was the first Fast and Furious movie that I ever saw, that I ever watched on cable. It's the Fast and Furious movie that made me a fan of the franchise. I love this movie. That being said, there are some things that I don't think have aged well, or things that seem to have gotten worse since I've gotten older. That being said, I still think it's a well-made and really good action movie, street-level action movie, because I think a lot of the stuff is executed, particularly with the vehicular action. I think it's all executed really well, especially when you get into the final act and you have all that car scramble and stuff, and the Dukes of Hazzard moment with the boat. And plus you have the introduction of Roman Pierce, who's just a great addition to this franchise, as well as Tej Parker. In this movie, he has kind of that mohawk going on, not mohawk, afro going on. And this is another one that I just think is a very underrated entry in this franchise. Part of that could be due to my big nostalgia for it, but I love this movie, and I think it has an underrated soundtrack as well. I don't think it's as good as a couple others, even in this franchise, but I do think it's an underrated soundtrack as well.
Fast and the Furious. Ja Rule all one, yeah.
And so coming in at number 4 is the original The Fast and the Furious. This is a movie that initially I liked it less than Too Fast, Too Furious. And a few years ago, I probably would have put it much more in the middle range, if you will. But the more time passes and the more I watch this movie, the more I like it and the more I love it. Especially when you get towards the end, that highway robbery scene. I just think it's executed extremely well. It looks like just great practical action effects, vehicular action. And I love vehicular action, and I just think it's executed so well in this movie. So I know this is basically just a street racing version of Point Break. I'm not going to deny the fact that it's somewhat of a ripoff of that movie. But I don't think it hurts the movie at all, in my opinion, because a bunch of movies rip off other movies. I mean, The Magnificent Seven ripped off Seven Samurai. Those are both classics within their genres. You know, something that does hold it back is the fact that I don't necessarily think the acting of the side characters, particularly Letty, I think her performances in the later sequels are much, much better than this one. And even most of the side characters outside of Vin, Paul, and Jordana Brewster, I don't think their performances are entirely convincing.
Got 3 strikes, I'ma go for it. This moment, we own it.
So coming in third place is Fast and Furious 6. Now this is a movie, like I said before, I absolutely love, but it does make one small little nitpicky error for me that holds it back from being up there in the top 2, and that is something I brought up a little bit when I was discussing the 4th movie, and that's their description of how Letty survived, because it makes it seem like Brian didn't check to make sure there was a body, or check that the body was actually Letty, which is something I just don't buy into. That being said, I do think bringing her back was a good idea in the long run. And the action in this movie, yeah, this is where it really kicks up the bonkers nature of the action. But personally, yes, I grew up and loved those first 3 more street level movies. But personally, I don't care if they go to space or whether they bring it back down to that street level. As long as they do a good job of it and the characters stay true to themselves, I don't personally really care how bonkers or crazy the action gets, as long as it's done well. And this movie, it's done pretty well. I love the tank scene and that whole highway scene, on the bridge. And Dom, leaps for Letty and stuff. And then the plane scene, the airplane sequence, is a great sequence. It's one of the best final action scenes, final battles. I don't know if battle's probably a good word for this movie and these later sequels, but I just love that. And I like the way they kind of conclude things. Like Giselle's fate, in my opinions, not necessarily set in stone, because she kind of went out in the movie the same way Owen Shaw did, and Owen Shaw has come back before, after this movie. But I do really enjoy this movie. I don't really have many issues, other than the fact it's kind of just the middleman for me between 5 and 7. And so I just kind of gets lost on me a little bit because of that.
Salute me, familia.
And so coming in second place is the movie that the vast majority of people put at number 1. And honestly, I can't argue against it. I love this movie. I think it's a fantastic and great movie. And I can't really argue much negatives with it. I love this movie so much. The only real thing I will give this movie that holds it back from being number 1 is honestly the villain. There's not really any villain here compelling anyway. It's just a guy, just a rich mobster in Rio that they steal money from. But I don't think it holds the movie back personally, in all honesty, in terms of the quality of the movie. And I do kind of think this is the best made and best quality movie of the franchise. But it's not necessarily my personal favorite. It's my second personal favorite. And it's a very, very tight race for this number 1 position. You could argue that they're tied. I can't really say too much negatives about it. It's got some great action scenes. The final action scene with the heist, I absolutely love that. It's done brilliantly. It's got so much heart in this movie. I love the way they bring everyone together. I love how their different characters are utilized in this movie, and how they each have like their own separate roles. I just love this movie. And within this franchise, I guess, I don't necessarily think it has a great soundtrack. I do think it's a good one, but this franchise, in my opinion, has some of the best soundtracks. And I just don't think this one is quite up there. It has one of the best songs in the franchise, but as a whole, I don't think it's quite up there.
Take over the street, that's how we roll, and we gon' ride on forever.
And so taking the first position is Furious 7. This is a movie that I never get tired of at all. I've watched it so many times since its release, and the ending still gets me every time. But even the whole movie as itself, not just the way they write out Brian's character, but the whole movie itself, with the exception of maybe the inclusion of Mose Gioconde, the Jaimin Hunsu character, he felt a little like he didn't need to necessarily be there at all. And Deckard Shaw is easily the best villain in this franchise from this movie. Later movies, he's not really a villain, but here he makes a great villain. He has a great motivation that also revolves around the theme that Dom's runs by. And so it's kind of like if Dom was on the other end of it, if you will. And so I just think it's a nice contrast to have both sides being motivated by family and everything. It just makes for a great, like, thematic writing to this movie, in my opinion. And even Brian's character has a phenomenal character development arc in this movie, where at the beginning of the movie, he's having a lot of trouble coping with domestic life and suburban life and being a father and driving minivans. And Mia says that he misses the bullets. He doesn't miss the girls or the cars, but he misses the bullets. And through the progression of this movie, you get nice development to where by the end of the movie, he's perfectly fine and happy to go live this dream life with Mia and his son. And I just find it so brilliant, and I just love that story and his character arc. Plus the action sequences I just think are great and phenomenal overall. But I don't necessarily think the final action scene is as good as like the middle of the movie action scenes. Particularly, you throw in Tony Jaa in this movie, and when they're like rescuing Ramsey, you just get this great fight scene between Paul Walker and Tony Jaa, and that whole sequence, even the vehicular action parts in that sequence, I think are done really well, and I love it. As well as when you get to Abu Dhabi, yeah, it's a little ridiculous for them to drive this supercar through two buildings like that, but like I said, it fits the characters in my opinion, and I think it's done really well. So that bonkers crazy stuff like that just adds excitement for me sometimes if it's done well. There are things in 8 I don't necessarily think are done entirely well that do bug me within the bonkers action, but in 7 it's all done pretty well, and I absolutely love it, especially when you get the character development and everything behind it and the thematics behind it coming from both the good guys and the bad guys. And I just don't really have anything negative to say. This is probably my favorite film soundtrack of all time. And I love this movie so much. I love this movie more than most people probably, because this is the movie that fluctuates the most in the rankings I see. Some people put it towards the bottom. Other people are like me and put it towards the top. But every time I watch it, I can't help but just absolutely love it. And these are the reasons why it comes in at first place. Thanks for watching this video. I absolutely love this franchise. And if you love this franchise, you might be a big Vin Diesel fan. So make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell, because I have a big video coming up pretty soon, hopefully this Friday or this weekend. That being, I am planning on ranking every live-action movie starring Vin Diesel in a live-action role, so there won't be MCU. I apologize for that if you're a big fan of those movies, but if you're a big Vin Diesel fan, smash that subscribe button, like I said, hit that notification bell so you don't miss that video, and also comment your thoughts on the Fast and Furious franchise, as well as your rankings of the franchise, and I will return next time when I see you again.